guys, welcome back. As always, my name is Leyzar, and today we're going to be talking about semi-automatic weapons going full auto and the Cannonade mods. Two features that were introduced with the Jade Shadows update and affect a lot of weapons for the better. Normally, semi-automatic weapons fire a couple of bullets in rapid succession, like the C-Body's Prime. Essentially, I'm just clicking my mouse button and that's kind of it. Now, there are ways around this a bit awkward firing system. You can either bind your fire to your scroll wheel, or you can use a macro to rapid fire your gun. The problem with using a macro is Digital Extreme's stance on macros. You do so at your own risk. And no, I'm not paraphrasing, so it can be a little bit in the gray area. Another option is to bind your fire through your scroll wheel, which is not exactly ideal either. Nowadays, however, these are problems of the past. All you gotta do is go to Options, Accessibility, and here you have two toggles that you need to enable. Fire manual trigger weapons continuously, both for keyboard and mouse, and controller as well, so those are two separate toggles. Realistically speaking, you shouldn't really have much reason not to keep those on. And now, through the magic of options, look at that. That is so much better than before. So in case you ever had issues with macros, or you didn't want to bind your fire to your scroll wheel, or even worse, you have issues with carpal tunnel, this should solve that problem. A bit late, but hey, better late than never. This option affects all semi-automatic weapons, including charge-up semi-automatic weapons. A good example would be the Tenora's Altfire, and that fan favorite, the OG or the Vandal Opticore. So nowadays, all I gotta do is head on over to my enemies and keep my trigger finger pressed down like so, and the weapon will continuously fire. I can even go zoom in or zoom out. The weapon will reload and continue firing. Now, there are some exceptions to this rule. For example, weapons that can hold their shot in. A good example of that would be that fan favorite Lanka. In case you guys didn't know, once upon a time the Lanka was the meta weapon to use for sideline hunting together with Chroma. This one doesn't work that way because you have the option, the extra control of holding in your shot and releasing when you're good and ready. This option does not affect weapons such as the Lanka and bows, so any traditional style bows. Now that we're armed with that knowledge, we can talk about the brand new Cannonade mods. There are 3 in total, one for secondary weapons or pistols, one for rifles, and one for shotguns, so essentially primaries and secondaries. These offer you a huge chunk of flat damage and 1.5 meters worth of punch through across the board. Not only that, only compatible with semi-automatic trigger. That's right, my friends, if you got a weapon that is duplex trigger, it's not gonna be working. Automatic, not gonna be working. Burst trigger, not gonna be working. Strictly on semi-automatic weapons. But what happens if a weapon, let's say an incarnate weapon, for example, has both a semi-automatic trigger and an automatic trigger? A good example of that would be something like the Felarx. It goes full auto, but then it goes semi in its incarnate form. A weapon that has any fire mode which is not semi-auto will not be compatible with any of the Cannonade mods. Not only that, these Cannonade mods also lock in your fire rate. Fire rate cannot be modified, it locks into the base value. Now, this is a good and a bad thing at the same time. For example, oh damn it, I can't increase the fire rate. You cannot do so with mods. Warframe abilities, basically nothing. But it also works the other way around, which can be beneficial. Let's say you got a sweet Riven, but that negative, god damn it, minus fire rate. Not a problem. Cannonade mods, if they are equipable on that weapon, will be nullifying that negative, making it irrelevant. Not only that, most meta builds nowadays use the corrupted critical mods that offer you a huge chunk of crit, but also take away a bit of fire rate. Cannonade mod is equipable, yes, then that negative becomes irrelevant. But let's take a couple of examples, starting with the fan favorite Kuva Chakurr. This is an absolutely amazing fan favorite weapon that absolutely annihilates anything and everything that stands before you in a single blast. And now, my friends, it's full on automatic. But what about that Cannonade mod? Is it worth using on the Kuva Chakurr? And the answer is yes and no. We need to bear in mind that the primary benefit of Cannonade mods is that flat damage, 240%. But on the Kuva Chakurr, we're already using Galvanized Aptitude, and depending on the number of stacks that we have on your target, Galvanized Aptitude is gonna way outperform the flat damage that Cannonade gives you. Are we using it correctly on the Chakurr, however? Because this one has an explosion, so surely Galvanized Aptitude will not lend its damage benefit to the explosion. Now that is true, but it's also true that most of the damage of the Chakurr comes from the projectile making contact with a target, and the explosion only attributes about 30% of that. So going for Galvanized Aptitude is not necessarily a bad idea. In that case, I don't really need any more flat damage, especially if I'm gonna be using a primer, a secondary or a sentinel. What do I have left? The 1.5 meters worth of punch through and the lock-in of the fire rate. Does that actually help me or not on the Chakurr? The 1.5 meters worth of punch through thankfully does not mean that your explosion will not trigger on the initial target. What you need to bear in mind with punch through and explosive projectile based weapons is that sometimes it's actually doing more harm than good. The projectile can go through the initial target and explode somewhere else when it doesn't get you the damage benefit. That does happen on some weapons, especially if you're not gonna aim strictly for the ground or for the feet. That fire rate is locked in, so that means critical delay minus 20% fire rate no longer counts, and I was counting on that one because you see on the Chakurr the meta way is internal bleeding, and I want double that benefit, so I cannot have above 2.5 fire rate. Thankfully, even with Cannonade nullifying the minus fire rate of critical delay, I'm still well below 2.5. And you also see as soon as you equip Cannonade, let's take it off, you get a little lock on the fire rate, so it exemplifies very well what you're doing to the weapon. Now, we're not gonna harp too much on the builds, but ever since Jade Shadows came out, a lot of things have changed, starting with resistances and vulnerabilities on enemies. If you need more info on that, if everything seems a little bit fuzzy, link the cards right now. Now let's take a secondary example in the form of the Incarnate Lex Prime. Should I be using Cannonade on this one or not? 300% flat damage. Dude, that is huge. Yes and no. You see, the Incarnate Lex Prime gets full benefit out of Galvanized Shot, so that means as soon as this one is fully stacked and the target already has 4 statuses, I'm already getting more flat damage out of Galvanized Shot than out of Pistol Cannonade. Another thing that you need to bear in mind when considering Galvanized Shot Aptitude or Savvy versus the Cannonade mods. Sometimes the Galvanized mods apply in a multiplicative way instead of an additive way. In that case, both of them can coexist quite nicely. In fact, it's actually recommended. What about the punch through? Surely that is useful. Useful in normal fire mode. In secondary fire mode, the Incarnate Lex Prime has infinite body punch through. Now, normal punch through will still help if you want to shoot through walls or maybe perhaps just touch the side of that corridor and make sure that the projectile keeps going. But what about the fire locking? Isn't that useful? Not in this case, simply because it's not worth going for Creeping Bullseye and the minus 20% fire rate, because the difference between Creeping Bullseye and Prime Pistol Gambit, it's only 13%. If I were you, I would simply not bother with it if you already got the Prime. Not only that, keep in mind that when it comes to secondary arcanes, you don't have a whole lot of cool options like you have for primaries. There is no secondary Frostbite or secondary Blight, there's just a whole lot of flat damage coming from a whole lot of sources, like Cascadia Flare, which is flat damage, or Merciless, which is flat damage, or Deadhead, which is flat damage. Again, not fantastic. You could say, hey, use Encumber, but this is not exactly the type of secondary weapon to make the best use out of Encumber. So in the case of the Incarnate Lex Prime and weapons that have this archetype, I would not be using the brand new Cannonade mod. But let's talk about a powerhouse where I would use the Cannonade mod. My friends, one of the absolute best weapons in the game, the Incarnate Latron. I love this one. I cannot be objective about this one. You see what's missing? Galvanized Aptitude. Hold on, Laser, what gives? Why aren't you using it? Simply because the radial attack that does not benefit from Galvanized Aptitude's damage bonus accounts for most of the damage that this weapon does, so I'm not using it on it, which makes room for me to use Semi-Rifle Cannonade. 240% flat damage, which is a whole lot more than Serration at 165. The 1.5 meters worth of punch, which helps me in my brand new automatic, semi-automatic, normal fire mode, and of course that fire rate lock, which again helps me in this case because I am using critical delay. Semi-Rifle Cannonade on the Incarnate Latron fits right in perfectly. Essentially what I'm trying to do here is give you examples that while these mods may be new and exciting, you don't just blindly put them on. They offer some variety, they offer some option to building, which is fantastic, and they work really well on certain builds, and they're not going to be worth using on other weapons. Primary Frostbite on this one, we're going to be using a primer because I do want to show you what this one is capable of. The Hellstrom right now is built for the following: Corrosive as a primer, because the autocane that we're going to be shooting are vulnerable to vital damage, which is why we have vital damage on our weapon. Not only that, we're also going to be priming with cold, so we proc that primary arcane. Oh, did I mention that the brand new cold proc is a lot more powerful than the old cold proc, so you would really want to cold proc your targets. Regardless, here we go. What can I tell you? I love it. I love it. The Incarnate Latron has 2 semi-automatic fire modes, and both of them benefit from the brand new option, and Cannonade in this case just simply, beautifully, and without any issue fits right in. Now normally you should let your little sentinel or your primer to prime your targets, but rest assured you can absolutely demolish everything anyway. And look how easy it is nowadays to charge incarnate form. Beautiful, fantastic, glorious. The legendary Arca Plasmor in Tenant flavor. Should you be using Cannonade on this one or not? You guys tell me. No? Why is that? Oh, you're saying you're getting all the damage that you need, all the flat damage from Savvy? That's correct. But what about the punch through? Don't you guys want punch through? What's that? The Tenant Arca Plasmor has infinite body punch through? Oh, no way. But what about the fire rate lockout? Isn't that worth it just to mitigate critical deceleration? Honestly, for just that one alone, I would not be using Cannonade. Oh, and this might be stating the obvious, but if you're going to be using a Cannonade mod to lock the fire rate, that means no extra fire rates from your Warframe abilities or any sources either, so that's also something to keep in mind. Unless, of course, you get a Riven that has minus fire rate and you want to work into it. So again, in the case of the Tenant Arca Plasmor, not really worth using. But hold on, I got another fan favorite. My friends, do you remember this one? It used to be meta for about a year and a half. The Mighty Za. This, my friends, is an explosive weapon, which means we're not going to be using Galvanized Aptitude on it. Cannonade works perfectly on this one. Boom, 240% damage. The punch through, which thankfully does not cause the explosions to go haywire. Normally, you're going to be aiming for the feet with this one anyway. And of course, the fire rate lock-in as well, which works because we are using critical delay, frostbite as the build we showcased earlier. Essentially, it's the same archetype of build, but it's an entirely different weapon. Would you guys like to see what this one can do? Before it runs out of ammo. Fully stacked. Let's try a little bit of carpet bombing. Beautiful, fantastic, glorious. I absolutely love this weapon. Too bad about the ammo issues though, but hey, what can you do? So this would be a good example where Cannonade works fantastically well on the weapon, and the Ogress essentially is kind of the same example, because I know you guys love that one as well. And I do believe, my friends, that is pretty much it. As always, my name has been Leyzar. Thank you guys so much for watching. Like, favorite, share, and subscribe only if you enjoy the content. If you got any feedback for me, let me know in the comment section down below. Also in the comment section down below, if you want to suggest any particular type of guide. And again, if you guys are still unfamiliar with what's going on with the damage and resistances, the factions of Warframe past or post Jade Shadows, I got your back. Link in the cards right now. I'll catch you guys in the next one.